Jeremy Lent, glad to present you, the author of The Web of Meaning. This webinar is organized by three Belgian organizations, all of them questioning a bit dominant narrative we're living in today, and all three helping to create like a new story that serves the continuing unfolding of life. So the three organizations are called Regeneratief Leven, translated regenerative life, Restory, and then Imagine Life. Jeremy, very, very happy to have you here with us.
Hey, Eddie. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Good to hear your voice, and so that everyone also can hear your voice. I'm gonna ask you an opening question, like introduce yourself, whatever feels right for you to share at this moment and in this setting.
Hmm.
Who are you?
All right. Well, um, that's a good question. I used to call myself like an author and integrator. Like on my website, I thought for a while, how can I explain who I am? And I like the idea of saying, well, I'm an author, but I'm also an integrator because a lot of my work is about integrating different forms of meaning or different approaches into something that really embraces it all, but is also allows for that differentiation. But honestly, what was coming to me right as you asked right now is the way I would probably describe myself at this moment in my own life is I'm somebody who is has taken almost like a vow within myself to devote myself to the flourishing of all life on this earth. And I can truly say that everything that I'm doing at this point in my life is really with that deeper intention, is to really move towards the greatest possible flourishing of life on this earth right now.
Wow, that is a very good introduction. I think this is an answer that not that many people would give if you ask them, who are you? So apart from the author, an integrator, and with a vow to help flourishing life. And
Mhm.
you wrote a magnificent book. And I think many of the people here read the book, perhaps not all of them. The Web of Meaning, and with the subtitle Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe. And you do ask some profound existential questions. Who am I? So it's regarding the identity. Where am I? Cosmic context. What am I? Human nature. How should I live? Ethical question. Why am I? What's the purpose? And where are we going at the end, which is the collective future?
Mhm.
What made you write this? What's
Yeah,
the
what?
start of it?
uh, yeah, well, ultimately, the this entire book is really my the results of my own inquiries into exactly these questions that I went through over a number of years of my own life. Um, and so I can give you a little bit of a uh, background to where that all came from. Is essentially I spent pretty much the first half of my life really up until some period, maybe about 15 or so years ago, doing my life in a very different way, like more along the lines of that guy Uncle Bob that
Yes,
I
yes, you mentioned in the beginning of
mentioned
your book. Yeah,
in
yeah.
my book. Just essentially part of mainstream culture, doing my thing. I actually I ended up started an internet company and took it public, and that didn't ever feel quite like my thing, but it just circumstances of life led me to do that. Um, but then things happened in my personal life that caused basically everything I built around my life to sort of crash around me. Like my wife at the time, she passed away some years back, but she began to get quite sick. And I looked out, I left the company to look after her. And then this company that there was it was, I founded it during the dot-com boom and all these things happening. And but I really left it when it was too early in its own development. And I was staying around as chair of the company, but it basically crashed and collapsed. And then I had to deal with all the aftermath of that while I was looking after my wife who was going through like borderline dementia. And so I really lost the person that I had loved all my life, even though I spent years then looking after her. So it's as if my life had sort of crashed around me. And I asked myself, like, whatever I do with the rest of my life, I wanted to make sure it was truly meaningful to me. But I realized I'd never really asked the question, like, what is meaning? What is actually meaningful? And so I ended up spending years of my life really trying to ask these questions, questions about meaning. And then as I did that, I didn't want to take for granted any preconceived notions, whatever they were about God or the soul or what makes humans human or what is the purpose we're here for, anything like that. So sometimes I know and there are people who give you answers to that, and they might feel good, but they don't feel intellectually valid.
Mhm.
And then there are some people who give you the answers that seem very rigorous, but they feel like wrong to my heart and soul. I was looking for some kind of, was there a way to answer these questions that felt right to not to both my mind and my heart and my spirit, like something within me. It took me years and years of really going through layers of inquiry, like around not just history or philosophy, but then more like anthropology, looking at other cultures, and then looking even deeper at evolutionary biology and what makes humans different from other animals and what is life anyway. Um, and as I started to do all that, it wasn't just an intellectual exercise. I discovered things I'd never discovered in my life, like um, mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism, Taoism, embodied practices. And really, having spent a big part of my life totally not aware of these things, these are like revelations to me. And so a lot of what I was trying to do is, was there a way to make it all make sense? And as I did all that, I realized that part of what I wanted to do was to share with others this own inquiry that I did to maybe make it easier for other people to explore these things along the way that I did. So I wrote a couple of books, and one before this book was called The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. And that book looks more at this kind of historical investigation I did, like all the way from where humans were hunter-gatherers a long time before, and it looks at the ways in which different cultures have made sense of the universe, and how that has actually shaped the history of humanity all the way to the present day. And it kind of also looked at, it sort of took us to this pretty crazed way in which we have our lives right now, which on one level seems to be incredibly sophisticated scientifically, technologically. In another level is like so fragmented and so alienating and so devoid of meaning. Um, and then the second book, The Web of Meaning, really just shares my own sense making that I had brought from this journey. And a lot of it is not meant to be like, oh, I've got the answer. I've come up with some real, it's more than anything about looking at the great insights that have been shared with all of humanity from these different traditions, both from the historical traditions, indigenous, Buddhist, Taoist, Neo-Confucian, and also from modern scientific insights, from systems science, evolutionary biology, cognitive science. And a big thing that I came to is realizing that there's no actual necessary distinction between those. That some this distinction that we're told in our modern world between science and traditional stuff or wisdom or qualities, we're told that they're two separate domains. And I realized that's a made up, that's part of our worldview of separation. It's really not actually true. So a lot of this book looks at what happens if we unwind that and look at those deeper interconnections.
And did you believe that personal experience you went through made you write this book so that you can connect with what happened in your own life, that you needed that pivotal moment to make that change between running a company and being more, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think this probably is true. And it's a really a little bit like if you look at Buddhism and the sort of description of the sort of the path, almost like the beginning of the spiritual path. And it sort of there's almost a sense in which that um, the first we experience what in Buddhism they call dukkha, like a sense of suffering, a sense that something's not right. Um, but then there's an experience of an awareness of that. And I think that's almost like the beginning of any kind of path of inquiry is the awareness that there's something that's not right. And then along with that, an intention to do something about that in one's own life. And I
Mhm.
think many people may have been maybe in the position that I was in before that time, like that there was a lot of dukkha and suffering that I was experiencing in my life, but I hadn't gotten to that place where I could recognize that. So you'd sort of do things almost
Automatically,
intuitively
yeah.
to try to reduce the suffering. You try to, do this, deal with that problem, have a relationship, try to make money or whatever it is, improve your status, whatever, but without realizing that there's something deeper that is available. And in my case, and I think for many people, there is some sort of crisis that leads you to have to begin to answer that question. I do think some people may be fortunate in a sense that they just start to naturally ask that question anyway. I don't think there's
Without a crisis.
one
Mhm.
like path is true for everyone. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, it did require, for me, it required basically a complete sort of breakdown of the attempts of meaning making I'd had in my life to really ask these deeper questions.
I like to refer to something which happened recently here in Antwerp.
Hmm.
Quite a few people here present probably know about it. We've been cutting, or they have been cutting 62 trees recently nearby where we live, and it was a lot of protest demonstrations, legal actions. Actually, police was involved. They were treated like gangsters, the people trying to protect the trees,
Mm.
which created a lot of pain for people because these trees were planted in the 60s. People grew up with them. They were in front of their house and then suddenly they disappeared. Um, so there's a lot of anger and maybe in the meantime, also politicians are start to realize, oh, well, first thing they said, we badly communicated. But of course, it's a lot deeper thing that is
Yeah.
missing. This brings me perhaps to what you call animated intelligence
Hmm.
that trees have souls, all living creatures, and we treat them as I don't know a piece of garbage. Actually, um,
Yes.
as a society, it seems that quite a few of us are not really aware of that intelligence of nature. So you wrote about it in your book. What does it mean for you? Animated intelligence versus
Right.
artificial intelligence, for example.
Hmm. Yes, right. Well, and that was one of the discoveries really I made as I went through this all this kind of deeper investigation is realizing one of the sort of preconceptions we have in our dominant worldview today. Some people might call that modernism or whatever, but it's this sort of sense that there's only one form of intelligence, which is the one that we humans display more obviously than any other mammals that we know of, which oftentimes neuroscientists call it, have different names for it. I thought the name that made sense to me was I call it conceptual intelligence.
Mhm.
Sometimes people call it symbolic intelligence or whatever. But it's the kind of intelligence that we have as humans as a result of a more developed prefrontal cortex. That's the sort of evolutionary aspect of it. But it enables us as humans to really develop things like language, which began to develop a more collective conceptual intelligence and then pass that on to new generations. So over time, we got to develop all these technologies and not just language, but a sense of separation from the rest of life. Like we began to realize we can act on the rest of the world and we can think through things and um, which is all wonderful stuff. And it's something to totally celebrate about us as humans. But what happened, and that really happened to the most obvious in the most obvious place with Descartes and the sort of rise of modern thinking in early modern Europe. That famous statement from Descartes, cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. And at that point, there was this sense that that thinking is not just something that differentiates humans from others, but it's what makes us our actual, it gives us our essence, our true identity. And it's as if you look at the logical implications of cogito ergo sum, then the corollary of that was if there's another entity that doesn't think in the way that we humans do, then they aren't. They don't exist. And that is actually the very foundation of this modern worldview, which is that somehow the only entities that have true value or that are worth optimizing for, that have like a sort of moral rights, are human entities. And the rest of life is just there for us to do with what we want. And occasionally, maybe there's pets or whatever that we might have a warm, our heart might open up to a particular animal or something. But for the most part, as humans, as part of this dominant system, we treat animals and we treat the rest of life as objects, as nothing other than resources for us to exploit, which has led, I would say, in some ways, to maybe the greatest moral atrocity that's ever happened on the earth since life began is like the factory farming that causes like something like 70 billion animals to get born into these horrendous cages and suffer lives of absolute misery and pain until they're like murdered, so that we humans get to have a nice, easy meal at the end of the day. And that kind of way in which we just you like feel like all of nature is there for us to use however we want is really one of the things that we have to rethink in terms of if what it really means to be alive in this world today. And that animate intelligence is really something that science has now come to understand. It's something that indigenous traditions everywhere around the world always understood. That we humans, we have our distinct characteristics, just like crows do, or just like trees do. And what we really are is part of a family of all these other animals and creatures. And recognizing that and coming from a place of humility around that, and a place of recognizing we might have certain powers that other entities don't have, and how can we use that for the benefit of all of our family, of all our relations? That is one of the big shifts that I think is available to any of us, and that as a society we need to do if we're going to have a long-term future on this earth.
You also talk about fractal fractals a lot, well-being across all scales, in contrast with the main narrative of today. Can you elaborate a bit on that one and linking it with animated intelligence?
Yes, well, that the very notion of fractals is something most people might have a rough sense of what that word is, but it's actually a mathematical concept, which is really recognizing that there are patterns sometimes that then recreate at larger and larger scales, going on and on. Sometimes it can be done almost infinitely. But what's interesting about patterns is about fractals is that every time they recreated these larger scales, they are actually their principles might be the same, but the actual exact shape they take is different. So that's why some of you may have looked at some of these pictures of fractals, and there are these amazing videos where you can sort of go in and into some of these mathematical design patterns, and it just goes on infinitely. And it kind of blows your mind because you sort of realize that something you think you're looking at something, and that's what it is. And then you go in and you see there's a whole universe and below that or beyond that you didn't even know was there. And what is fascinating is that that's one of the insights of modern thinking and modern science that again was understood by some great traditions in the past. So, this is a lot of where, as I did this research into other traditions, I found that traditional Chinese thought had these amazing insights that many of us are simply not aware of in the West. And one of the concepts they had was um, they actually looked at the entire universe really in terms of patterns. And the way they described the sort of the ways in which things connect with each other, the sort of principles of organization, if you will, they called Li. It was just the word they used. And we're familiar with that traditional Chinese word qi, right? Which
Yeah.
we usually translate as like energy or matter. And that's in itself is interesting that their idea of qi was what Einstein finally discovered with E equals mc squared. The energy and matter are really the same thing, just expressed in different ways. But to them, qi was one thing, but the way in which qi organized itself was Li, was the patterns. And to me, this was one of the great sort of light bulbs that went off as I did all this research and I was reading about traditional Chinese thought as I was reading about modern systems science and complexity theory. That in modern systems science, there's a particular writer called Stuart Kauffman, just a great, really a profound thinker, mathematician, biologist, and systems thinker. And he writes books with names like At Home in the Universe, looking at these patterns. And he was writing at some point, we're discovering this whole new way of understanding our place in the universe, which has never been experienced or thought about before in human experience. And here I was at the same time reading these great thinkers from 1,000 years ago in traditional China who essentially were talking about the same thing. They were saying, like, we all, if we look at these Li, these patterns of existence, they were describing fractal. They were saying the Li of a blade of grass is also expressed in the whole world. And then they looked at the universe itself and said, we don't know what came first, but ultimately there must have been some sort of core underlying pattern that led to the qi expressing itself in some way that allowed all of this to happen. So their very notion, instead of having a God that they looked at, their very notion of what they called the supreme ultimate was the sense of a deep underlying patterning of the universe that existed even before the universe itself was there, and is there in every one of us. The very concept of what nowadays we think of as a hologram or whatever. So this is the incredible insights that what we're discovering in like this modern mathematical understanding about fractals has been understood in deep ways from other deep wisdom traditions. And to me, this has a deep spiritual implication because we begin to see ourselves just as part of something so much bigger. And once we begin to really open up to that, and this has been, a profound part of my own spiritual journey, the sort of layers of sort of ego identity or layers of separation begin to fade away. It's not like I have to break them down or try to transcend them. They become almost irrelevant as I begin to sense that my identity really is a pattern within a pattern within this larger unfolding set of patterns that is our universe.
When you're mentioning these ancient wisdoms, and then you're also referring to modern science, I mean, what happened with these ancient wisdoms and they've been replaced by modern science, and now they're trying to find each other back again? Or how do you see that evolution happening? If there is any evolution in
Yeah.
that
Um,
range of
well,
thoughts.
this is also so interesting because when we when we talk about modern science now, I think it's important to make a distinction that is really not made enough between what is called um, reductionist science and system sciences, if you will. Um, and I mean, maybe it helps to begin with, like, oftentimes people who have some of these spiritual insights that I'm talking about, they get to sort of reject science. They say, science leads to all these problems, and these people don't understand the deeper, more heartfelt, spiritual existence we're talking about. But I don't go to that place. I think it's important not to reject science because if we just think about what science actually is, I see it, people often think science is value free. It's like something separate from values. I don't believe that's the case. I think science has some values, and it really, these are great values to really embrace. These are values like a desire to understand the world, a transparency. Like when you are doing an experiment, you share it with others because you're all working collaboratively to try to get to a deeper understanding, and open to empirical evidence. So if you discover something in an experiment, you go back and you change your understanding. So there's a humility that comes with true science, a recognition that you may not be right, and you got to explore things. So there are core values to science, and that scientific project, if you will, over many hundreds of years now, I think is one of the greatest contributions that has happened to humanity. It's a wonderful treasure that we have. So that's science. But then a particular branch of science, which is like the one that Descartes and Francis Bacon and Galileo and others set going in that early modern Europe, was around what's called as reductionism. It was actually Descartes who defined reductionism. And he said, basically, he discovered if you look at smaller and smaller things, you begin to understand them better. And let's make science almost like the actual word science actually comes from a Greek or Latin word to do with cutting. So it's almost let's like cut things down to smaller and smaller parts, and we can understand them better. Brilliant insights. And it led to then breaking science into things like biology and science and chemistry. And then as scientists did exactly what he suggested, they discovered molecules and elements, and then they discovered forces in physics. And in biology, they discovered cells and then DNA. Um,
But
so
they forgot
again,
the
this
whole.
is, sorry?
They forgot the whole.
Well,
The connect.
this is the thing. So it's important. My point is n there's nothing to reject about this. Is some of the great advances which has led to us having things like the germ theory of disease and me being able to talk to you thousands of miles away. We can all be grateful to that. But they forgot the whole. Exactly, Eddie. And what is interesting is that because they were so successful, they got to actually believe that that is the only approach to the universe. And so there's the what that led to is what I call like ontological reductionism, which is people who think that reductionist science is so good that it's the only way to understand the universe. And also, it actually enables us to understand the entire universe, and there's nothing else there. And this is what systems science does differently. And systems science is every bit as rigorous. And I would say, in a way, it's more open-minded because that reductionist ontology loses some of those values of science because it's a leap of faith that they make, which is equivalent to maybe a traditional Christian believing in God just because they want to, they're told they should or whatever. It's the same sort of thing. Like in this case, modern system sciences and complexity sciences, they don't reject reductionism, but they say, in addition to that, we need to look also at the ways in which things connect together and understand that at different emergent layers of that complexity, new rules apply, new principles apply. And it's only by looking at those you get to understand basically complex systems such as organisms or nature or essentially anything that's living, which where those complex parts interrelating is as much, if not more important than the actual stuff they're made of. So that's what I think is important to understand. But the problem is that most people are still in, even in today's world, even though system science has been around now for 100 years or so, and people have explained it absolutely clearly, most scientists still think that the only science is actually reductionism. And every now and then a reductionist scientist comes across systems thinking and they have their own personal eureka. But we have not yet seen the paradigm shift where science as a whole has recognized that reductionism is just one element of a larger project.
If we build on that and we look at the transformation aspect of it, in your book you also talk about it may start with a personal transformation before
I
we
think
go to an organizational transformation or a societal transformation.
I think this is important to understand. Part of this recognition of these deep sort of interconnection that I'm talking about is that we also can't just make this clear separation between what is our personal experience and what's happening in the world around us. The ones I recognize that I'm part of everything that's happening around us. Um, the actual transformation itself is a breaking down of that barrier. So sometimes people will say, um, we like before we try to change things in the world out there, let's do our own internal personal transformation, which is a wonderful thing to notice and to be aware of. That a lot of us, in fact, I'd say pretty much almost every one of us, in our way, we look at sort of the colonization of Europe and the rest of the world. We've also had our own minds colonized by modernism. So our very ideas and the things we just take for granted have been imposed on us through this last 500 years of this dominant worldview. So a lot of what we need to do is recognize that and shed that. But we don't do that separately from being engaged in the world. It's not like first I got to fix myself and then I'll go out and try to do things in the world. Because it's by engaging in the world, it's by looking at the really the terrible harm that's being done in the world right now, and looking at the ways in which these same basically deluded ways of thinking are coming out in violence around us, all around us. By engaging with that, we also get to be discovering about ourselves. So there's a little bit like a fractal right there. Like there's a certain system of what we can think of as ourselves. And then there's like all those around us that are the people we have direct relationships with. And there's a global system of society as a whole. And to me, the transformation has to be happening at all those layers at the same time. And each transformation of one layer helps to impact the transformation of the other layer, rather than one have to happen before the other.
I like the expression you said about colonizing our minds. So we should decolonize our minds.
Hmm.
And how do we do that? How do we approach that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And really, I think the first place to approach it is a little bit like when I was talking about that Buddhist path, beginning with dukkha or whatever. I think it really, to begin with, is a recognition that there are patterns within our own minds, our own ways of thinking and acting and being that are destructive and that come from the dominant culture, but ones that we might have imbibed very, very early on in our years. So there's a certain intentionality, a curiosity, and an awareness of that. And the intention then has to be to recognize that with the orientation towards working with that. But a crucial element around that um, is what can simply be called a quality of kindness. We need to bring kindness to that recognition. Because what tends to happen is without bringing everything, all that whole investigation with a sense of this really self-compassion and kindness approaching to it, we look at bad things within us, and then it's painful. And then we can get to almost create more separations within us. There's the good part of me that is trying to be more intentional, and that bad part of me that's more destructive or causing harm to others. And then I try to get rid of that bad part of me, but then that part might be very deep within me, and so then it reacts. And then maybe it gets the power to say, screw this whole project. I'm just going back to be free, to be who I am. And so we don't get anywhere. But this is where kindness and compassion play such a part, because we can recognize that any things we recognize within ourselves originally were there to try to protect us against a lot of the time patriarchal ways of being, like upbringing that puts values around violence or harshness or a discipline that causes those soft parts within us to get defensive and then learn to be hard or whatever. So we have to learn those parts began within us in very um, ways to just try to protect ourselves as an organism. But by approaching that with kindness, we can begin to then allow those parts to unfold and really sort of get trusted, really, that they can be seen without getting told that they're bad. And that same kindness and compassion can then be applied to how we relate to others, which is crucial, because then when we see others acting in ways that we think are harmful or destructive, rather than intuitively getting angry with them and trying to stop them from doing this harm and all this stuff, we can begin to recognize, well, they've got their parts. And how can I approach that other person from the same place of kindness? That's not saying that saying it's okay for them to do harm or it's okay for me to do harm, but by recognizing the underlying cause of that, we can begin to build bridges and begin to like heal together rather than just create new layers of harm over the old layers.
And based on this kindness and compassion, you also talk about why am I, like the purpose, where you
Mm.
set yourself that when you want to do your personal transformation, you are also searching for, okay, what's my role here on earth? Maybe that's a very big question, but what's the role of humans on earth? Is that something that is also one of the questions you've been asking yourself?
Absolutely. And that is very much a deep, deep inquiry I've been on over the years, primarily, from my own personal inquiry. Why am I here? But then it can apply to all of us, but each of us obviously has our own unique way of trying to come to that. And I think this is where, in a way, it comes back to the very first thing you asked me to say, who am I? How do I describe myself? Um, for me, as I did my own version of this very deep inquiry, really came to this place of recognizing at a certain place, what became so clear to me is um, uh, and it's actually, there's a quote from the great humanitarian Nobel Prize winner, actually, Albert Schweitzer, who lived in the 20th century. And he said at one point, I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. Um, and my own place came to something very similar. I realized, like, I am life. When we talk about this notion of the fractals, it's not that like I am a living being or how can I be good to life or whatever. It's this realization that all of us as living entities are like little eddies of a sort of a self-organized entity as part of this stream that's been unfolding, this incredible, miraculous stream of life over billions of years since life came on Earth very early on Earth's existence. And when this particular organism dies and then composts or whatever, the very the ways in which I've expressed who I am to others around me are really like those patterns, those Lee patterns I was talking about earlier, that are out there in life. And so even though this particular organism might die, um, those Lee patterns that I have expressed in my life continue in like as they sort of move out into the universe. Some of them grow and turns into other things. Others merge with other patterns and become other things. But once I begin to recognize that, changes everything. And what it has done to me is go like, well, given that I am life, and it's really this miracle of this existence, that here I am with a consciousness and able to express things and understand life in the way that others of us as humans can do. It felt to me there's nothing more important to do with this particular embodied existence than to use whatever skills I have for the benefit of life, which is what I am, which is that larger entity that I'm part of. And so to me, that gave me a real sense of absolute clarity. Just whatever I'm doing with my life is really for the interests, really for the benefit of all life. I'm looking at a screen behind me on the wall. I framed something that I wrote around that time, some years back, where it just simply says, what can I do for the greatest benefit of all life? Um, and to me, that's profoundly meaningful. And I feel very fortunate because it gives a sense of meaning in my life that I never feel I'm having to ask anymore. Well, what is the meaning? What am I here for? To me, that was my answer to my question. What it doesn't answer, though, is how you do that skillfully day by day. So that to me is a living inquiry. And a key element, we were talking about fractal flourishing before. A key element around that is not to interpret in the way that says, I need to sacrifice this
Mhm.
flourishing for the sake of all things. I got to like work nonstop and do everything and give all my money away and do every single thing for the benefit of something external. There's the notion of fractal flourishing is that by my own organism feeling alive and healthy and happy and flourishing in itself, I'm able to then have the most positive impact fractally on all those layers of patterns that I'm connecting with.
You're
So
spreading
life
the
and
energy.
yeah, so life doesn't become a zero-sum game. Like I could either look out for me or look out for somebody else. I'm a good person or a bad, selfish or not. That all gets to be irrelevant. Like, what I can do is like look out for the health and flourishing of my own being in order that I can truly serve the rest of life in the most powerful way.
I'm very curious. In the meantime, a lot of people are listening to what you're explaining. We're going to ask them a bit later on to go to breakout rooms and to reflect a bit, not a bit, on what you've been sharing with us now. There is something that I really, in the beginning of your book, your Uncle Bob, that
Mhm.
says it's dog eat dog world, every man for himself. What if you have such a family member on the table? And we all have these kind of family members around us. So how do we tackle that? Because you can say, okay, it starts with yourself, and we want to take care of ourselves. And if we take care of ourselves, we can also take care of others. But then you have this Uncle Bobs around us everywhere. And unfortunately, perhaps even more and more, they get more and more media attention. So how to act, react,
Yeah.
live?
Exactly. No, I know. And that's always this ongoing question. And to be honest, I really truly did have my own family member, to protect the innocent, whatever. I changed the name, whatever. But there was a I in this book for people who don't know the book that begins with basically a family grouping and somebody saying, we should be doing this. We can make the world a better place. We can. And then his Uncle Bob comes into the conversation and says, "Oh, let me tell you, all these good ideas you've got, forget about it. Basically, it's a dog eat dog world out there.
It's all about the money.
Selfishness wins. And that's why capitalism is so good, because everyone looking out for themselves is actually for the best interest of the whole world. And, sure, we've got some problems, but markets, they solve it. So you don't worry about it. Yeah, end of conversation, right? Where it's all over. And so I've been there myself. And well, and I basically said that when I introduced the book, this book really, the whole book is really like the refutation to Uncle Bob, that actually there's a completely different way of seeing ourselves as human beings, of understanding the world, and not just different, but actually one that is scientifically valid, more valid than this Uncle Bob interpretation that people think is true, but is just made out from preconceptions. But having said that, when you're actually facing your Uncle Bob, they don't, I mean, you can talk to your blue in the face. Um, and one of the things that's interesting is really the more intelligent people are, the harder it is to actually get them to open their minds to hear what you've got to say if you have a different point of view, because the people will use that intelligence to then formulate, their sort of
Counter
legal
arguments.
arguments,
Yeah.
smarter and smarter arguments why you're not right. So that doesn't necessarily get anywhere. So I've come to believe, and this is not to say I always manage to practice it myself. I can get frustrated like all of us do, but I've come to believe that the best thing we can do is try to, sort of going back to that place of kindness I was talking about before, is to try to connect with them at a deeper heart layer. Because whatever they might say about dog eat dog world and selfishness and separateness, we kind of know actually they do have living, beating hearts and they do want to feel connected. And part of what we can do if we want to really live into this way of understanding things in this place of connectedness is to actually look at where that is coming from. What was it in their own way of development that led them to formulate these ideas? Usually it's their own, some place of their own suffering or something that they deeply want that they didn't quite get or whatever. But if we can ask them questions to connect with them and hear what actually is meaningful to them, what that tends to do is has a little bit of an alchemical kind of effect, because then as soon as they begin to feel heard, they're not arguing against, so they don't have this pain in the ass family member always arguing with them, but actually hearing them and caring about them, then they begin to soften. And then in that place, to me, the best way to leave that kind of conversation is not having won out or scored a point, but leaving them curious and maybe leaving them with something about, oh, well, there's this really interesting article, or really the
Mhm.
website I really love that might answer some of your, would you like me to send you a link, just to sort of opening them up to some possibility that doesn't seem threatening to them, but that might be a little bit of a chink in the armor of that, like armor of separation, that might open them up to some other way. So I've come to believe that's the most skillful way to relate. It's also a more pleasant way to relate, but it doesn't always work that way. So
I
I'm
think it's good
working on
advice you're
my
sharing with
my
us.
approach is just like we all are, but
Listening,
that's
asking questions, softening them that way, feel the connection, and then they can start thinking themselves.
right. Yeah.
I'm watching time a bit. I heard you're writing a new book, or you're working on a new book. Can you explain us a bit?
Yes.
Because now you make me curious. So,
Um, This is actually a something that's really become, yeah, near and dear to my heart the last few years. And it's a book that's going to be published next May. Um, and the book is going to be called Eco-Civilization: Making a World That Works for All. And but to give a little bit of a sort of backstory to that. So one of the when I ask this question of how I can work for the greatest benefit of all life, it's to me where that led my own thinking to go is recognizing that our system right now, the dominant system, is so destructive, is causing so much harm through such extreme inequalities, destruction of the natural world, that it's really heading for really maybe total
disaster.
collapse or some kind of very, very devastating outcome this century. And it felt to me like what's crucially important is to turn things around. And that book, The Web of Meaning, ends with this vision of what would the world actually look like if we organize the world itself according to the same principles of this connectedness and this dignity of all life, and recognizing how we're part of all human beings around us and part of all life. And it's an idea that was not my idea, but one that I came across that others had been formulating their thoughts about, of what's called an ecological civilization, or an eco-civilization for short, which is looking at what would it look like if our entire system were redesigned around simply setting the conditions for all beings to thrive on a regenerated earth. Such a simple idea, something that makes sense probably to almost everybody in the world, but is so different from how our system is actually designed, which is really around the notions of extraction and exploitation. That very worldview of modernism really is expressed in global capitalism, which is really about exploiting and extracting as much as possible to create this kind of wealth pump, to sucking wealth to a tiny elite at the very top. Um, and so I spend a number of years now researching and discovering that in every aspect of what we call civilization, um, brilliant people have done the work already to think through what a redesigned system might actually look like. So just like in the Web of Meaning, I spent a lot of years looking at the great insights of others and trying to cohere it together into a coherent form. I've tried to do that with this book, is really look at the ideas that, again, not my ideas, but ideas that are already being developed and done and performed in some cases in communities around the world. And seeing that whether it's in technology or education or urban design or thinking about economics or finance or governance or rethinking democracy, put it all together. And there's actually a vision of, there's actually a future available to us that could truly work. It's not a utopia. It's not like some, wouldn't it be nice if kind of
Mhm.
future. It's one that's actually available to us. But the institutional blocks, of course, are stopping us actually getting there right now. But the thought behind this book is that if we can all share this sense, there's a life-affirming future beckoning there for us, then the millions and millions of us, of movements all around the world who are already doing this, working on this stuff, can maybe begin to strengthen their coherence together and actually help us transform our future towards that positive approach. So that's the book that is coming out in May. I'm just finishing the manuscript really right now in the next few weeks. And so I'm
Wow, looking forward to
looking
reading
forward
it. I
to
guess
coming.
all the people listening here as well, because that's indeed the next step in what we're going to do now. All people listening is I would like to thank you for this part. It's not finished yet. We're going to call you back in to answer questions. But I would like to invite, and Xenia, my wife, is going to help me with it. We're going to divide you in small breakout rooms. And we would like you to just overthink the conversation or the interview I did with you. And so, what resonated, and what are specific questions you want to ask? I've seen that in the chat box, people have put some comments and so on and so forth. But take the time now to chat in a small group of people about what you heard and learned, and what are the things you would like to ask to Jeremy. So, we're going to go into a 50-minute breakout room, which is really very short. So, the idea is tell the others what resonated, find out questions you still have. And then afterwards, we're going to ask Jeremy back to answer these questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy, for your inspiring explanation. Um, you remembered us of the fact that we are full of preconcepts and ideas that are not ours. You remembered us, and we felt in our small group that it's true, and mentally we know that. So it was good of you to remember us. But the question is, how do we work that? How can we get through all those conceptions? Because we know that they are there, but we don't know how to tackle it and how to get through. We had one way, and that was by going to the body, returning to the body, and feeling, using the body as a sort of monitoring system within a certain situation. How can I contribute to more life in this situation by feeling, by using the body?
Okay, Philip, I'm going to
So
stop you. You asked the question. We're going to ask now Jeremy to answer it.
Yeah, and that is a great. I love where this question is going, and yeah. So as you were talking, this question of like, how do we know what we can kind of trust, essentially, in all these thoughts that go through us, and there are these great meditations in the Advaita tradition. There's this meditation known as neti, saying, which is essentially if everything that comes through you go, this is not me, this is not me. Like, and in Buddhist meditations, similarly, there's this recognition that really none of those things necessarily us. In modern psychology, there's a increasingly well-known practice called parts work, which does something similar. Which, if I have a angry feeling, or I think this is wrong, or whatever it might be, recognizing that's actually a part within me, and it's something that I can honor. I think this is the crucial element about it is all those parts are to be honored, not disparaged within us. But then there is this sense of something larger. And I think the embodied approach is a very, very important one because that is something that we know exists within us, is our embodied feelings. But even those feelings we have to recognize can often be, you can have feelings of anger or feelings of any kind of feelings, good or bad feelings, which are also partial feelings. There are particular states that I'm in for one moment to the next. And there are some sort of non-dual traditions that just look at the really almost like that notion I was talking about earlier of the in Neo-Confucian thought of the supreme ultimate, or just some sense of the universe as a whole can hold it all. And each of us has the ability to connect with that bigger space and just feel into like a deeper wisdom which can hold all of it and allow really almost like this deeper layer of compassionate recognition. No matter what we do, no matter what we think is the right thing today, we might have moved on for another thing the next time. But to me, one, it comes back again to this notion of kindness and compassion. And there was one great statement of wisdom that came to me a number of years back. It essentially said something like this, like, look around you on your path, on your spiritual path. Um, Look around for kindness. If you don't see kindness, then maybe you're on the wrong path, basically, because that is the one, that's the thing we can always bring with us in our own investigations and in how we relate to others, that you can almost always trust.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Anne, I'm going to quickly take a short question from the chat and then we go from chat to
Yeah.
questions. I had a question on intuition. I've been reading your chapter 3 and I agree intuition is important. I'm still a bit puzzled. Is it slow or fast intuition? My experience, it can take its time, but Kahneman calls it fast. What's your opinion?
Yeah, and that is a great question. And I think the answer is both, really. Because yeah, we do. We have like gut feelings sometimes, but that's the whole thing is sometimes those gut feelings can be wrong. That it's not, and we have to be careful not to just say, oh, I just go with my gut, I can trust that, because sometimes even that is wrong. And there's a biologist, a brilliant biologist called Robert Sapolsky, who wrote a book called Behave. Very, very deep cognitive understanding. And he said something very, very important, like that when we're dealing with people in our in-group, it brings up a lot of our core human sense of solidarity, what we can believe and what we can really trust. When we deal with people who are an out-group, who seem different, they look different, or they speak different language, they have different ethnicity or whatever, oftentimes that what feels our intuition may turn out to be wrong in that respect. So his advice, and I think it's really good advice, is when you're working with people within your in-group, kind of trust that gut feeling. But if you're relating to somebody who you recognize is not in your in-group, maybe be a lot more curious about where those things are coming from and try to bring a broader and wider perspective before you begin to trust that gut.
Okay, thanks. Anne Smith, your turn. Juliet. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for a wonderful presentation again. Since you published your book, The Patterning Instinct, hardly any publication of my hand does not like you. I've been very inspired, but I would like to join you. I'm also a member of the Top of Rome, so I brought you in there. Yeah, and so what was also a reflection in the little breakout group that I was in, that you focus a lot on the worldview and the mindset, but there's also a material reality that sucks us into this, extractive mindset, and some of it has to do with the new media or the medical science that is embedded in all sorts of I don't know, specialist uh, practices, because and another root cause of that is, of course, is the money system, which is extractive by design. We stupidly inherited it from medieval bankers without ever questioning it. So there's a whole other technicality of that, and we've been working with a group of people also here in Flanders on making money, the money system, realign with life. Like what you said at the end, life is the frame of reference. Can we imagine a money system
Mhm.
to help us to foster regenerative activities? So this is just a shout out. If you would like to integrate some of that in your latest book, I'll send you a
So, a
message
question,
on.
Anne? Do you have a question too, or just a shout out?
Just a reaction of,
Okay.
do you also think we can look into the money system or into the financial thing, and do you see alternative pathways there, or do you say no, I just mainly
Yes.
focus on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And please do go ahead and send me what you were mentioning. And very much my answer is yes to possibilities for transforming the money system. And in this new book, Eco Civilization, how and that making a world that works for all, I have a chapter on looking specifically at our money system, looking at some of the fundamental problems with it. Essentially, the whole notion of debt-based money is a fundamental underlying foundation of the requirement for growth, which leads to this massive amount of debt that is in the world right now, which essentially just serves to make the elites even wealthier, and requires growth in order for the whole system to be stable. It's almost like this game of musical chairs where the chairs keep getting pulled, and every time the music stops, like everyone's, what do we do? And there are ways, very straightforward ways to change the money system. There's a number of different ways. One is a centralized way, just having governments issue money, not through this debt finance, but to where it's needed the most. Other ways are around community currencies, alternative currencies, things like that. So a lot of different approaches, but that has to be fundamentally changed. Thank you.
Okay, another question. Many people experience nihilism, so it's a question of era, as a response to personal collective disillusionment. Can ancient wisdom, traditions, or a new worldview grounded in ecological interconnectedness offer a durable sense of purpose and meaning in an age of rising nihilism?
Yes. Well, I think really a big emphatic yes to that. And I think that this is a real problem. In a way, nihilism relates to some of the major uh, crises we're facing right now in the world. A major one of that is the incredible inequalities that have led so much wealth to get sucked up by such a tiny elite that people have no longer feel that they feel this whole system is structured against them. And so when people try to say, talking about things like fixing the system, they say, bullshit. Like, this is not working for me. And then when people on the progressive side just are still trying to work within the system and trying to make things a little bit better. And then people on the authoritarian extremist side, the only ones with the voices that say this is all screwed up. Then people begin to believe that these are the people speaking to me because they're saying what I feel in my heart is true. The whole system is as a mess. So then they end up moving towards authoritarian ways of thinking and those this kind of nihilistic ways of thinking. And so I feel what's absolutely crucial is to recognize that first off, from the point of view of what we call epistemic chaos, the social media and the sort of breakdown in our shared understanding, we need to really come from these questions we're talking about today, like from our heart and from our real connections we can trust with people, knowing that that's what we can truly trust is our actual deep heart connections and go from there. And secondly, we have to be ready to say that this system does need to be transformed. One of the messages from this book I'm writing right now, in relation to people who are trying to fix the system, saying actually the system isn't broken. The system is actually doing exactly what it was intended to do. The system is designed there to extract and exploit and create this wealth pump for elites. And it's doing a great job of that until everything completely destroyed. We have to change our entire system. So what I would want to do is take the energy that leads to that sense of nihilism is a true valid energy. Is its recognition, this is all a bunch of crap like what I'm being told, but that can be turned into something that really allows us to work together towards a truly positive, transformed future.
Maybe a question which is related to it, coming from Neil. How collapse accepting are you, given the state of the planetary predicament?
Yeah.
How can we use the wisdom and insights to show up in these moments?
Another very huge and very important question. And around that, um, I think that there is a lot that has to be done to unpack that very word collapse. Um, because I mean, I feel very strongly that we are headed towards this complete breakdown of our system the way it is right now. And people who look at that and say we're headed for collapse, totally I'm with you in that recognition. But there's um, when you actually look at what collapse means, there's one extreme where the entire thing, like a house of cards, totally collapses, which would be really the greatest devastation ever to happen to the human race ever since we evolved as human beings. There'd be billions of people within days would find themselves starving, violence, the most terrible trauma would happen. So that's not something we can actually look forward to and saying, well, that's good, we can rebuild from there. But I think what I think, and I've looked at this issue in quite some depth, the more likely on expectation is what we can think of as an unraveling, that the system is not working. But this kind of unraveling can take place over decades. When systems move towards collapse, they generally go through what's called flickering, where it looks like things are falling apart, and they come back again a little bit better, and then it falls apart again. And each time they're getting closer and closer to what's known as a phase transition. But in our case of our global civilization, we might have decades of this kind of unraveling, this flickering. And it's so as things get to be worse and worse, it actually ironically opens up the degrees of freedom to almost reweave our society's fabric into a different way that could be more life affirming. So I'm certainly not somebody who, I certainly don't welcome some sense of collapse. And at the same time, I'm not avoiding the sense of how much worse things are. But to me, what is opening up is this possibility in the years to come to work with this unraveling as it takes place and actually create the future we want from that.
Yeah. The person who uses Hilde Jonker's Zoom, you raise
Hello,
your hands.
Uh-huh.
my name is Yves. I've been working recently on something similar. So things like fractals resonate with me, shared wisdom in the past, but also in the present, not only in civilizations, but also in nature, in architecture, in art, symbols, in science, in, for example, physical laws, things like that. So maybe after the chat, I would like to connect, but I'm very curious on your view of what is our role as an individual, what is the role of AI, what's the role of blockchain, and what's the role of values in your eco-civilization you're writing about.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, well,
thanks.
thanks. Well, so and I see we're coming close towards the end of our time, and these are these big questions. So maybe what I'll do is, I think I've talked somewhat about how I see our role as individuals, but you raise a very good question about AI and blockchain and technology, and I think that's really worth taking a look at right now. And so again, I think it's important not to reject the incredible advances that technology offers us. And whereas blockchain is oftentimes viewed as cryptocurrencies and people just trying to get rich quick and all this stuff, it also opens up opportunities, for example, for what are known as DAOs, like distributed autonomous organizations, which are ways to decentralize power within groups, allowing it to move towards more of the grassroots. I think the important thing to look at both AI and any kind of blockchain type of technology or whatever is where does the power reside in that system? Now, right now, as these systems are developed within the context of global capitalism, for the most part, it's all centralized. And the power actually resides in increasingly centralized and powerful groups, whether it's Facebook or Google or whatever it might be, or Airbnb or whatever, where the information itself is only held by this group that then uses the information to give themselves power at the expense of everybody using it. I think what's critical in all technological development that we want to be truly life affirming is to start from a structure that decentralizes the information. So that, for example, something like Airbnb or any kind of rideshare, like Uber type of technologies, it's possible for rather than the information all being shared by a centralized group, for the people using it to have the power over their own information. And that's the kind of technological advance that can actually allow us to have technology, even AI, in a way that actually helps each of us rather than some gigantic big corporation. So there's a lot more to talk about, especially in relation to AI. But again, what I'd say about AI in general is that we have to recognize that it's incredibly mesmerizing for us, and it's beginning to take over so much of people's ways of being and relating very, very quickly. And it's really important to recognize that even when it's giving us these great answers and amazing, seeming like insight into what we're talking about, it's reflecting back the collective knowledge that is primarily part of this modernist, Western dominated viewpoint. So no matter what kind of responses we get, we should be really careful to not just assume that what we're getting is this great wisdom or great insight, but really ask ourselves our own questions, being very aware of that.
We're getting to the end. I see that there's some good questions still in the chat, and also Erik now raising his hand. Erik, can you be very brief? And I want to go back to a last question of Bob in the chat. But Erik, very brief.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, I try my best English. So for me, I'm a doctor, a GP, retired, and I am resonating with your good practice on your own. But when we go together to the system, that's the only way, the trusted networks. So we try to go from illness to wellness, from I to E, it's one letter. And what do you, I believe in microorganism, in microbiome, the science of the microbiome and our identity. We are coming from microbes. And I believe in food, very much the effect of food, of healthy food. And my question is, as an example, I can eat very good and very healthy, but when a food restaurant, a fast food restaurant,
Right.
McDonald's is coming to our village with a new identity. I can doing nothing. So I need a lot of people or trusted networks to counter the toxic aspects of what happens at this moment. So in your new book, how do you face the we and the networks? That's my question.
Yeah.
How do you do
Great
it
question.
without to sacrifice yourself too much?
Yes, and you know, food itself, food and agriculture is a big issue that has to be transformed entirely for that life-affirming future. To the point you say, and just more generally, the way we look at networks a lot is actually the more normal human, evolved human way of organizing ourselves is according to what's known as the commons-based ways of self-organizing, with not with hierarchies, but with groups that work together. And some of you may know of the work of Elinor Ostrom, Nobel Prize-winning economist, who looked at how commons works. Another book I strongly recommend is by Silke Helfrich and David Bollier, called Free, Fair and Alive, which is a modern rendition of looking at the commons. But the theme of the commons is very much central to the book I'm writing and to our possible future, where we organize ourselves at local levels. But that doesn't mean that we ignore those bigger systems. But those local levels can fractally connect at larger and larger levels, all the way up to regional and even global levels. And for some of you who may be familiar with in Rojava, a region in Syria right now, is organized according to that way. Deep radical democracy, millions of people in an entire region where each different group is making their decisions at that grassroots level on the street, but it actually fractally goes all the way up to high governmental sort of places. I think that's a crucial approach that's available to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bob's last question. All people here are part of the same bubble. How can we broaden the awareness and invite other people to engage the collective transformation that is necessary to evolve towards equal civilization?
Right. That's a very simple question to to ask. Of course, I'm joking. Yeah, great question. I think that it's almost like what we do once we realize that we're part of something so much bigger. It gives us both a one way we can relax a little bit. We can recognize this is not up to each of us. None of us alone are going to solve all these problems. And so rather than get overwhelmed and everything like that, we can just say, look, I can just do my part. So that's what one aspect. But the other aspect of that goes the other way around. We realize that actually each of us does have a very significant part to play, that we can't just simply say, oh, it's such a big system, I can just relax and do my thing. We actually realize that what we're doing can have, like those Lee ripples I was talking about before, can have impacts even beyond what we even know. So it brings a certain sense of responsibility to us, that each of us can ask that question, what can I do for the greatest benefit of all life? And in each case, we'll have different answers. And in each case, the answers might change over time for each of us too. So it's not like there's one fixed way of relating. But I think that this is the question that I invite each of you to bring into your own life day by day, like saying, and each of you, yeah, maybe not every single one of you, but for the most part, I'm guessing, you has economic and cultural privilege. And when we look at this world of, 8 billion plus people, the vast majority of people are suffering from so much oppression, mostly through historical injustice. They don't have the opportunity or the luxury to ask these questions or be on a call like this. But most of us have some level of luxury and privilege and power that comes from that. And so it's incumbent on us, every one of us, to always be asking that question. Given the privilege that it's not unearned privilege. We didn't ask to be born in a certain, it just happened to us. But given this unearned privilege that each of us has in this global system which we're part, what can each of us do most skillfully, most effectively, to actually begin to be part of this system for transformational change that we need so much?
What a beautiful ending and invitation for us all. Before we go, can we all stay 5 minutes we're gonna switch the camera to the ones who've been harvesting visually. We're gonna show them what they came up with.
I think the idea was to surrender to whatever was coming, and draw, doodle, paint, scribble, color, things on a page that had to do with what Jeremy was talking about, or what you were feeling about what he was talking about, or associations that you had, or because you were bored, perhaps. But
I was noticing self-compassion and kindness, and glad to see that taking a central role there. And I'm loving the colors, honestly. And there's a certain warmth and vivaciousness, like a vibrant quality that I'm picking up more than anything as I look at that. So yeah, it feels real pleasure. It's lovely to see some of the words interspersed within it, but more than anything, like the sort of quality of the colors merging together feels like really both warm and rich and alive.
Can I ask the participants to use now the chat box to express your feelings or your gratitude or the things you learned very briefly for Jeremy? So direct your comments now in the chat. Type quickly. I'll read quickly. So how was this session for you? And it's going fast. So gratitude. What love. Connected, resonance, inspiring, life, hope, inspiring. So while people are typing, I would like to thank you, Jeremy, for this wonderful session, for the inspiration for us all, from the 3 organizations that organized this session. We wish you all the best. We wish you good luck with finishing the book. We look forward to it. We may give you another call in June or July after the book has been published. We've read it. So thanks for sharing that. Actually, for me, also a hopeful message. So it is possible. I think there are a lot of people around the globe who are actively involved in changing what is needed to be changed.
Yeah.
So in the name of us all, really thankful. Thank you very much for what you've done for us today.
Thank
And
you.
now
Thank you, Eddie. And
everybody
thank you
can
to all of you.
unmute and
Yeah,
clap.
everyone's gonna unmute and give you a big applause. So unmute yourself and
Okay.
so we wish everyone a beautiful evening or whatever time zone you're in. We're gonna share the recordings to all of you who participated. And Jeremy, if I know you don't want to fly, so if you ever take a boat or whatever towards the continent again, Europe, we have a big port and harbor. You see it in the background, so your ship can enter Antwerp. And we welcome you there.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been just a great pleasure to take part in this today. Thank you.